sunlight tastes a bit like trout, if anyone was wondering. Welcome back to Jeremy Vine Extra. I'm joined by solicitor Nick Freeman and podcast host Gemma Forty. There they are. So here is what we're going to be discussing. First up, should shops be forced to let everyone use their loos? A Costa Coffee in Bournemouth has been called out after refusing a desperate woman. She says that they denied her a basic human right. What do you think? Then, should paternity leave be mandatory? Love Island's Molly May Haig says that she was traumatised after raising her newborn daughter alone while partner Tommy Fury prepared for a boxing match. New mums must be at home away from work for a number of weeks, so should we expect the same from dads? And then after that, as the NHS reveal, almost half of Brits don't think of a stroke as a medical emergency. Dr Ellie Cannon will be here to explain the warning signs and deliver vital advice on how to help victims of this underestimated condition. Now, if you have something that you want cleared up, or perhaps you need advice on how to care for someone that's had a stroke, we'll be here to answer some of your questions. Maybe even you might be worried if you or your loved one has had a so-called mini stroke. Whatever it is, get in touch and hopefully we'll be able to help. And then finally, are single-sex schools old-fashioned? The prestigious Westminster private school is about to admit girls in all age groups for the first time after centuries of being boys only. Do single-sex schools still have a place in the 21st century? That's what we're asking. You can give us a call on any of our debates this morning, 0207 862 2222. That's 0207 862 2222. Calls from landlines may cost up to 16 pence per minute plus any call set-up fees, and calls from mobiles may cost considerably more. But you could always send us a message. You can head to Facebook or Twitter and search for Jeremy Vine on 5 and we should pop up. Just type our name in and leave your message there. Okay, let's get straight into our first topic then. And should shops be forced to let everyone use their loos? So a branch in Costa Coffee in Bournemouth has come under fire after a woman was told that she needed to buy a drink before she could use the toilet. Amanda Harris, who described herself as a lady of a certain age, has admitted that sometimes she gets a bit cross-legged and desperate. She claimed that she had been denied a basic human right. Now, Costa has stood by offering toilets primarily for paying customers, but admits that there are situations where staff should make exceptions, particularly for children and pregnant women. Gemma, what do you think?
Well, I think their statement is about as fair as you can be, because you can understand why businesses want to do it at their discretion so that you don't just know, oh, that's where you can go to the loo, and they just have queues of people just trooping in and out in toilets that need to be cleaned and maintained, and it just becomes all about that. That said, yeah, of course, if somebody's absolutely desperate, it's just kind, isn't it, to go, yeah, go on then. But, this whole idea of sort of making it a huge thing, I don't really get it. I know that there's not many public loos around. I know myself at times you're slightly caught short. Most places you ask nicely, they will let you go. It's that simple.
You don't often go into a shop though, Nick, and ask to use the toilet unless you are in fact desperate, in which case wouldn't the shop just be polite and kind, as Gemma says, to let you use it?
You'd hope they would be. I think if you wind it back a bit, what should happen is that it is a basic right to need to go to the loo, and I don't understand why councils don't have a legal duty to provide loos for everyone, and that would remove the problem. From the shopkeeper's perspective, it's their private premises. And you could draw the analogy with people knocking at your front door saying, look, can I use your loo? I'm desperate. You'd like to think that you would let them. It's your discretion out of kindness. But really, legally, the legal requirement will be for councils to provide adequate toilets for people, for the public. And then that generally removes, 90% of the problem. But I agree with what Gemma says, and it is a basic right that needs to be filled. And the more councils that are closing toilets, the more need there is going to be for us to rely on the generosity of people who have their own premises.
But it would appear that both of you sort of think that it should be the shop's discretion. Well, joining me now is Raymond Martin, Managing Director of the British Toilet Association. And Raymond, you've got a slightly different view on this.
Good morning, Storm and guests. Yes, we have. I mean, literally, as your colleagues have pointed out, it is a human right. There are 5 things we need to do as human beings. We need to eat, sleep, drink, breathe, and go to the toilet. And failure to do those things, we become unwell. So the BTA believes that we should have proper public toilets around the country. And as Nick pointed out, I think it is a council responsibility. It's something that the government should put into place to make sure that we have these facilities available to us when we're out shopping, whatever. And toilets can mean money. Toilets can actually bring economy. Toilets bring visitors and tourists, and they bring public out into the shops to spend money and whatever. So having a toilet can be a very, very good thing.
Is there any shops on the high streets or in the town centres that we know of that actually do allow the general public to go in and use their bathrooms? Because we all know certain places that we spy and we think if we're desperate we'll just be able to sneak in there and no one will notice us without naming them. But is there anyone that actually just allows access to the general public already?
Well, Stormy, you will find it around the country the bigger retailers, the Witherspoons pubs and the McDonald's restaurants and the various other fast food outlets and such like rely on public toilets. They rely on the toilets to bring people in to spend money, and they quite freely allow people to come and use the facilities that are there. It's just the smaller shops where you have security issues or technically, they struggle because they're trying to sell stuff. They're trying to look after, the goods and merchandise, whatever, and they don't have the time to put in to the bathrooms. But as Gemma, I think, said there, if you have a real need, out of kindness, a lot of people will allow you to come in, and if you ask kindly and put your case forward, they would allow you. But
I think
we're seeing more and more up and down the country. We're seeing more and more community toilet schemes where retailers are actually opening up their toilets, and that's good. But it still doesn't take away from the major problem of the lack of provision.
And the problem is, surely now we're living in an age with an older society.
Well,
and there's a greater demand, isn't there? To use loo. So the government need to deal with this. Otherwise, it's going to become a problem that needs legislation.
My top tip is just you go in and you just go, and then they go, yeah, please. Because what's
you're quite persuasive, Gemma. You are quite persuasive. But what if you're one of the thousands of individuals in the country that suffer from things like Crohn's disease, colitis? You said older people, but also children as well. Pregnancy, lots of things can cause havoc with needing to go to the toilet at quite a fast pace. And I'm just wondering how fair it is just to have to rely on, and I'm glad you mentioned them, the Wetherspoons and the McDonald's. Shouldn't other shops get involved as well, Martin? Raymond, sorry.
Well, absolutely, Storm. And in fact, there's a bill going through Parliament at the moment, and the government has proposed to put a commissioner for public toilets. It's the first time in certainly 20 years that I've been involved. We've actually got a piece of legislation going through which is going to bring in a commissioner, and the commissioner is going to sit down with an independent panel, which will be the BTA, and we'll be able to sit down and look at the whole needs, the whole human rights issue right across the country for drivers and public and families and pregnant mums and elderly people or older persons and such like who need toilets on an urgent basis. And as Nick quite points out there, as you do, people with Crohn's, colitis, IBS, bladder and bowel, all those different disabilities or accessibility needs. So we're hoping this new commissioner will take on board this and look at what the councils provide and try and put some proper funding into providing decent, clean public toilets.
Nick brought up the issue as well of private, your own toilet. Going into a shop and expecting them to open up their toilets to you is a bit like somebody coming to your front door and saying, I'm really desperate, can I get in and use your bathroom? Is there a difference legally between the two?
I think that's a very difficult net for Nick, really.
No, they're private premises. So you have a license, you have an implied license to enter the premises. You don't have an implied license to use their facilities.
But if you're selling, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you're selling beverages and food, you have to provide toilets
Correct.
for those that are in
your customers.
Your customers.
Yeah.
So does that not open you up to having to provide for anybody else? Or
If you're going in per se to use the loo, you're not a customer.
Yeah, it's absolutely fair enough.
And it's reasonable. It's reasonable.
Half-empty coffee shop which you're trying to make work with massive bills and overheads, and people are coming in spending a few quid, and then
in a cost of living crisis,
person after person after person just coming in to use the loo. That's going to destroy your soul.
Look, at the end of the day, if councils provide loos, there's going to be a charge now. We're seeing this increasingly for men's loos as well. This silly barrier that you've got to swivel, so you get in and you've got no change on you. A lot of the councils are asking for a pound.
That is irritating. They did that at Waterloo Station. You had to start paying 20p to have a whittle, and that was disgraceful. And then it went up to 50p. I was like, that needs to be an asparagus one. So that it's a sophisticated wee. They put it up, and I was like, that needs to be a sophisticated
Well, the
wee.
other thing is we're going to a cashless society now, so they're putting all these things in to charge you to use the loo, and eventually you're not going to be able to have any change. Anyway, Lisa from Norfolk, what's your thoughts on this? Should shops have to open themselves up to let you use the toilets? It's only polite, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It is only polite, but it is getting quite a chore when I do have customers come in. I've only got ladies and a gentleman, one toilet each, but I do seat 50 in my fish and chip restaurant. It's just that when they're queuing, for the toilet, and I know fully well that they're not, they haven't asked a member of staff, they haven't bought anything. So I do wait till they come out, and I ask them what would they like, and they just said, "Oh, I've just come in to use the toilet," and that's when I do respond and say, "Well, just ask. I won't turn anybody away if anybody needs to go to the toilet, young, old, anything." But it's just getting out of hand. And I have had some rather rude customers quite surprised that I'm asking them what they're doing in my shop.
Yeah, Raymond, what do you think about
So
that?
so it is, and it does get, especially in the summer, because obviously it's my staff that clean the toilet, it's my staff that I'm paying, I'm providing the toilet roll, I'm providing everything. Just ask, but it's just like everyday use these days, and with the God, can't get my words out. With the climate that we're in, it does get out of hand, and I do get annoyed.
Lisa, and I can hear it in your voice, I just want to put that to Raymond. What do you think about it? Like Lisa says, she waits and confronts people using the bathroom when they haven't necessarily bought any fish and chips?
Well, we're a country of over 60 million people, and really we can't rely on individual retail outlets with one toilet or maybe even a double toilet. There's just not sufficient capacity. We have to have public toilets in major towns, in major cities, and even down in our villages that will cope with the day-to-day needs of people coming in. Pardon me.
So I feel
to visit and to shop or whatever. Individual retail outlets just can't cope with the quantities that are available.
So you want to throw the responsibility back onto the government. Lisa, thank you very much for your call. Kathleen from Lancashire, do you own a business? Have you had issues with this?
No, I'm retired.
So what do you think about shops not opening up their bathrooms to the public?
Well, I know Boots do. If you go into Boots, they will take you to their toilet.
Do they take you to the toilet because you ask nicely, Kathleen, or do you think it's their toilets are just generally open to everybody?
I think they're open to everybody. A member of staff takes you and waits.
Waits to make sure that you come out.
Yes, I don't mind that.
No, not at all.
At 86, sometimes you have to go to the toilet. But what I'm upset about is our town in Lancashire, they've closed the toilets in the main street because of vandalism.
Yes.
And I feel that's terrible.
I think that's happening all across the country, and I think that's really something that's been echoed by Raymond and the panel, that actually maybe this is a job for the councils and the government to make sure that these things aren't closed down, and whatever they have to do to make sure that they're not used unnecessarily for other means.
But I think there should be provisions somewhere in a town for toilets, for people to go to the toilet, because as you get older, and children as well.
And pregnant. Kathleen?
Yes, and pregnant women, yeah.
I know. Thank you so much for your call. Now, after the break, we're asking, should paternity leave be mandatory? Should new dads be made to stay at home and support mum and baby? 0207 862 2222 is the number you need, and we'll speak to you right after this. Rhubarb is a plant where the stalks are edible and considered a vegetable, not a fruit. So welcome back to Jeremy Vine Extra. Nick and Gemma still here with us, and now we're asking if paternity leave should be mandatory. 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring with your views on this one. So Love Island star Molly May Hague has spoken of the trauma of being left to raise her newborn daughter Bambi on her own. Her partner and Bambi's father, Tommy Fury, who she met on the reality show in 2019, was largely sort of absent for the first month as he prepared for a boxing match with YouTuber Jake Paul in Saudi Arabia. Now, Molly May said that Tommy's return following his victory, he did win, last month was better than the day Bambi was born.
Like wholeheartedly, I have found it really, really hard. The one word to describe it, the whole last 2 months would just be overwhelming. I have been so overwhelmed. Like every single day, Tommy was like gone. You know, we weren't a family, and I knew we weren't gonna be a family until the fight was done, until he got back. And we had like how many weeks of that? Maybe like 4 weeks of that. Yeah, 4 weeks until he was gonna be home. So the first 4 weeks of Bambi's life, I really did do a lot of it by myself, and I was at home alone with her. I don't think I necessarily set myself up quite in the right way, and maybe when I look back now, it sounds dramatic and it sounds intense, but I guess like I do have a bit of trauma.
Now, new mums must stay at home from work for 2 weeks or 4 weeks if they work in a factory. Meanwhile, dads have the option to take 1 or 2 weeks of statutory paternity leave or none at all. But should they also have to stay at home to care for mum and baby? I'll start with you on this one, Nick. What do you think? Is paternity leave?
Paternity leave should be discretionary. It's for the family to decide between each other.
Should maternity leave?
Absolutely. The mother's giving birth. If she wants to go to work the next day, I had a partner and she came into work with the baby the day after she gave birth, with the baby in a cradle by the side of her office desk. That was her choice. We don't want a society, surely, that's going to tell us you must spend time with your partner, you must spend time with your baby. That's surely got to be a decision that you make as an adult or as a child between yourselves. That's your life, your choice. You'd like to think that between you get it right. I mean, you can have so many different situations, can't you? But what happens if a couple are together and they say, right, the man's going to go out and work and the woman's she volunteers to look after the child, say for the first 2 or 3 years of the child's life. That's an arrangement they've come to, and there can be huge financial implications if you force fathers, as well as resentment and aggravation. And it's going to cost the economy massively if you make every dad say you're going to stay at home for 1 or 2 weeks.
But when you look at the recovery period for most women, or the average woman takes 3 weeks to recover after giving birth. And as you're recovering, you're also having to look after this little thing that you're new to the job. You've got no idea what you're doing. You're not qualified. Nobody gets a degree for that one.
Absolutely.
And it's a real struggle. Wouldn't it help if, as a society, we valued fathers' responsibilities at home a little bit more and just said, right, we're going to give both mum and dad 2 weeks leave, and they have to take it so that they can work out how this is going to evolve.
The father's role is valued. It's not diminished by the fact that you don't force him to attend. A lady who gives birth to a child has parents, probably, family, friends.
I'm talking about the responsibility in the home. Because they have...
But they can come. That you can say to your mother-in-law or mother, will you come and stay with me? He's got to... In the case we're talking about, he knew he had the fight. That was a decision they made together. The fight was booked before she got pregnant. So that was their choice in life. And surely we're free to make our own choices.
Gemma?
What I'm hearing from that, though, is that if she'd known what it was going to be like, they would have made different choices. She's traumatised, right? And she's just had a baby and he's naffed off. And actually, it's... nobody does know what it's like until you, and so some people, like the partner you described, who's up the next day with a bayonet going into, like, good for them kind of thing, that's amazing. But it's quite almost, I don't know if that's a good thing for women to hear. And I think what Molly May did there was great, because she's been really honest about how overwhelming motherhood can be.
I agree.
And it can knock you for six. And as you rightly say, a woman is recovering from a birth, which that can go all kinds of ways. Your hormones are all over the place. You're absolutely sleep deprived. And it is an emotional bombshell in an amazing way. But and you need if you are lucky enough to have been doing this with a partner, then you need that person there. And I remember with my ex-husband, the father of my children, he went off after 2 weeks, and I was like, oh God, don't go. We'd done this thing together. We'd bonded together. We would, he was amazing. We were in this little bubble. And when he went to work, I felt completely horrified. I was like, don't go. And I was okay, and you get through, of course. But actually, I think we could do better. And I think that women end up having a lot more burnout, a lot more loss of confidence. They end up being the ones that, because they have that bond at the beginning, perhaps their career is the one that takes a backseat. So economically, it might be wiser to put more sort of equity on the roles, because, women are a very valuable part, and we need to close that gender pay gap.
I'm not suggesting that fathers shouldn't be there. I'm suggesting that they have the choice. And you'd like to think, He was at the birth, wasn't he? Mr. Fury was at the birth, and then he went off. He had a choice. He could have said, look, actually, being and supporting my partner is far more important than this fight.
But as Gemma said,
he-
but she hadn't had a child yet, so she had no idea what it was like. And anyone that's had a child knows that it's a shock to the system. And so shouldn't we be making legislation and putting things in place to protect
We've
people?
not just started having children. We've been having children since time
Oh, but
immemorial.
this
Mothers
is Molly's
know-
first.
Yeah, it might be her first, but you're not going to tell me that the midwives and everyone else aren't going to explain to her, what's involved. We've
Yeah,
just
you can
not started
explain
it.
it to
Yeah,
somebody,
you don't
but
know
you
till it
don't-
happens. You don't know how the feeding's going to go. You don't know what your
No, but you have
hormones are going
help.
to be
You
like.
have help. Help's available
Do you know
for
what?
you.
Back in the day, probably more people did have help
Well-
in the community. We all lived near each other. My mum doesn't live in the same country. You know, it's like
I didn't
everybody's
get it.
working until they're 70 or whatever. Yeah, this isn't true.
well, look.
And they say about it takes a village to raise a baby, and a lot of people don't have that support. But also, you know, it's actually should be two weeks out of someone's life is nothing.
But it's
If
a
they were
choice.
getting paid full
It's a
pay,
choice. It's a choice.
yes, I do agree. And of course, every single couple have to work it out as they go along.
Yeah.
But this idea that automatically a woman is going to absolutely take to it isn't necessarily
suggesting
true.
that.
So I just think if society promoted the idea that it is advisable and a good idea, if you can, to go into this together and figure it out once the explosion has happened.
Yeah. She's promoted it, though. She's promoted it. She's expressed her views. People hear, they make a view. You know, most fathers don't go off abroad straight after they've had birth. I mean, we're talking about less than 0.0001%.
But most do go back after a week or two. I suppose the other issue to bring in here, and we'll talk about it with our callers, is the idea of equality when you're going into the workplace. If we said that men had to take 2 weeks off and women have to take 2 weeks off of maternity and paternity, that means that when a woman or a man is going in to get a job, the boss or the person employing them isn't thinking, oh, well, they're of childbearing ages, so I'll probably take the man over the woman because I'll maybe have to pay
But a
less.
woman can take maternity for 52 weeks.
Not at full pay.
No, not at full pay. No, I'm not suggesting that, but the law entitles her to be off work for 52
I see,
weeks.
and I think that should be the
And
same.
so-
Like,
so
So
you're
what
not-
if
you're
we
not
made it the
choose
same for
which
both
one.
then?
Sorry?
What if we gave people the ultimate choice and made it 52 weeks potentially for both of shared so they could decide who takes it and mix it up a bit?
and actually, interesting.
Well, isn't that something that a couple decides together?
No, but men aren't allowed to do it. So I'm
No, they're
pitching
not.
another
The
idea.
maximum they can do it at the moment is 2 weeks at the moment.
So what I'm saying is, what if we expand that out and give them the option? They don't have to take it, but men also have the option to take 52 weeks paternity, and they can swap that with their other half.
So
You know, that's an interesting idea. The financial implications are huge, aren't they?
But
They're huge
What
because
if the woman is the higher earner?
well, then they work out that there's an algorithm they come to. They throw everything in. What's going to work for us, and they come to a decision as a couple. And it might be the woman does a month and the man does this. You work it out together. You don't need a government telling you what you need to do.
no, but you do
And
need
if
the
you're
government
self-employed-
facilitating choice. So, or perhaps
necessarily.
promoting choice and valuing women as much as they value men in terms of their economic input into society, so that all the domestic stuff, which we still bear the burden of within society, doesn't fall to us because that's been set up at that point in the relationship. South Korea, weirdly, offer the most paternity leave in the world, 52 weeks. Isn't that weird? And then it's Sweden, Slovenia and Iceland 12, Finland 11. We're number 13, which isn't horrific,
What,
but
2 weeks? Are you talking about for
yeah.
women?
No, for paternity.
For paternity, 2
is
weeks.
paternity, yeah.
I mean, it's
We don't need to convince you, Nick. We're going to
no,
take
no.
more
Can
calls
I
after
just
the break.
say? I mean,
Go.
I'll tell you this on air. When my second son was born by a section which I knew about, so we arranged it at 2:00 in the afternoon, so I could actually go to court and do a trial in the morning and be there for the birth. And of course I'm there every night and I'm supporting, but I don't. You know, it worked for us. And all I'm saying is, as a couple together, work it out yourselves and do what suits you. Don't let the government interfere. Otherwise, we're living in a nanny state.
Okay, after the break, we'll be taking your calls. We've got many people waiting. Should paternity leave be mandatory? 0207 862 2222 is the number, and we'll speak to you right after this. Welcome back back to Jeremy Vine Extra. Nick and Gemma still here with us, and we're taking your calls now on whether paternity leave should be mandatory. 0207 862 2222 is the number to give us a ring. We're going to speak to Audrey from Derbyshire first. What's your views on this? Do you think making paternity leave mandatory would be beneficial?
I think it might be beneficial, but we need some positive roles first. I think we need to see positive roles of people who have taken advantage of the paternity rules and have benefited from them. And not enough dads are doing that. So until we've got some more positive roles, I think we're in difficulties.
I see what you're saying, Audrey, that actually there is the option already there for men to take 1 or 2 weeks off work paternity, and there isn't a 100% take up of that. Why do you think that is, Audrey?
I've no idea. I don't think because they're valued. Somehow the women might think they're interfering. I don't know why. I mean, my grandson has been the most wonderful hands-on dad. He phoned me this morning to see if he can bring his 3 daughters to see me on Saturday because it's my wedding anniversary today.
Well, congratulations.
He has 5-year-old twins and an 8-month-old daughter. His wife will and he will bring them to see me on Saturday morning.
Which it
celebrate my 68th wedding anniversary.
Sounds lovely. Did he take his 2 weeks paternity?
Absolutely.
Did you take your 2 weeks?
No, I didn't take time for paternity, but I saw my kids all the time. You know, I saw them as much as I possibly could.
Do you think it would have benefited in any way to take paternity?
Absolutely not, because at any time that I could, I spent with them, and I've always done that. And that they're grown up. I'm actually, well, so I don't think it would have made the slightest difference, and I don't think they would either.
Audrey, sorry, you wanted to chip in there?
I think a lot depends on personal circumstances as to what the father does and how much time he spends around them in the first place.
I don't know anybody who hasn't taken their 2 weeks off, the dads that I know. And it's interesting because it's really generational as well. So then my parents' generation will be like, oh, these dads are amazing. Because, you know.
the quality, like what you have to do to be a great dad seems to be very different to what you have to do to be a great mum. Like, did you see that dad over there just standing with their children?
Just spending
time at the park with their kids.
But I don't think paternity existed when my kids were born.
Yeah.
I'm sure it didn't.
And so I think it will progress even further because, of course, you know, we're becoming the breadwinners, etc. So it needs to change with the time.
I mean, Molly May is definitely probably an equal breadwinner. I don't know what their finances like, but she's certainly not short of a bob or two, and she does very well on her own. Even she said she felt lucky when she had the father of her child back. Lucky was the term that she used when he was half the creator of that baby. Audrey, thank you very much for your call. Maureen from Surrey, what's your views on paternity? Is it useful?
No.
No, not useful.
No, they have enough holidays if they're in an employment job. They get enough holidays through the year, so they do what they did years ago, have their 2 weeks holiday when their child's born.
I suppose, Maureen, the outlook on that would be that as times change, we see what's necessary in society and what would be helpful to have a productive and happy staff. And once you've had a baby, your wife may need support depending on what happened during the birth. And perhaps it's helpful to be able to have a bit of time with her to help her look after this new tiny creature.
Well, yes, if she's got no hands, she needs help. But other than that, if you've got no maternal instinct, which I'm afraid you seems to be so these days, because they'll push them in a pram, then if they've only one hand, but they won't be talking to their child.
Oh, yeah, I see. So
they want 4 or 5 holidays a year. Everything's got to be around them. Well, no. Once you have the family, that should be your number one priority.
And Maureen, for men too?
Sorry?
Should it be the number one priority for men too, or just for women?
I said families, but unfortunately, there's an awful lot of women that don't even know who their father is. So what happens to all that paternity leave? No, I'm sorry. I just think it's out of order. No, it's not necessary. They could have their holidays. I
got you, Maureen. Gemma?
Well, I think Maureen has quite a glass half full perception of society, and perhaps there are, a few people that you mentioned, but I think most people who have babies are completely delighted, and that maternal instinct will kick in, but that doesn't mean that it's not really overwhelming if you've never done it before. And I can just say that for me, it was great having the father around.
Maureen, would you say when you saw the image of Molly May there, the video of her, do you think that's a woman that just looks like she doesn't have any maternal instincts at all?
When she had the child, she'd only been with him. How long had she been with him before she got pregnant?
3 years?
They got all the money, so really, what's the problem?
Well,
They got no eggs.
she's underslept, she's hormonal, she's been given this little bundle.
Well, yeah, but so every woman has always been like that. But
yeah, so should
we get on with it. We deal with it.
Don't they deserve a little bit of support, Maureen?
Well, if you've got a partner and he can be there, you're lucky. But if your husband happens to be self-employed and he can't just take time off, because if he just takes time off, there's no money. So, it's all
Nick,
about...
you would agree with that part? Or would you agree with all of it?
Excuse me, I'm not choking on what's been said. I'd like to think that the father would spend as much time as possible with the child when it's born. And I'm not advocating the father shouldn't. What I'm advocating is you don't make it mandatory. The option is there, take it, the option is there.
You just don't like the government getting
involved. I don't want the government getting involved. It's as simple as that. A father's input, of course, is massive. And most couples, I think, would say, let's do this together.
There's a big difference between the government telling you what to do, which, of course, I agree, it should be personal choice, or the government facilitating couples to be able to make the choice financially. And at the moment, and now you run a company, and obviously most companies now don't just offer the statutory. They have a deal, they have a package within, and they're much, much better than just the statutory.
I paid my staff when there was pregnancies the full
full
wage for the entire pregnancy.
And I bet therefore you retain staff. Your staff will be happier because of that. They've got more choice. I bet they come back and all that. So
you'd like to think so.
Yeah, you'd like to think so, right? So what I'm saying is this isn't, all woo-wah stuff. This is about trying to promote choice in society to get us a little bit more up the happiness index, because Britain's gone right down.
I agree.
Maureen, thank you very much for your call. Nikki from Cheshire, what's your views on paternity?
Well, it's interesting because I've been changing my mind as I've been listening to everybody talking, and I go one way and then I go another. And the interesting thing is that it's a very, very grey area. The word mandatory, it's you can't force anybody to take time off. If you do force them to take time off, that doesn't mean they're going to give the support they should be giving. And I changed my mind as I was listening to everybody talking, is that maybe I know that there are a lot of mothers who aren't supported by a partner, and they would welcome to have somebody in the family who, even if they're working, could actually, access a pot of time. So maybe a grandparent who's working, maybe a sister who's working, who can take some time off to be with the mum during that time, which can be so isolating, so scary.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
It is a great idea, but I can't help but notice, Nikki, that you mentioned sisters and mums. What about brothers and fathers? I suppose what I'm trying to get at here. I know you would definitely include that. I understand your view, and it's such an interesting idea. I suppose what I'm getting at is just societal's views on caring for a child is tends to be focused on the female being fully responsible and females being fully responsible. And I just wonder whether making this paternity mandatory will put more focus on men taking responsibility and actually enjoying it.
Yeah, but I think you can't legislate for that. And I do agree with...
Oh, Nikki, you cut out there. Just at a point I think you might have been agreeing.
I was interrupting you. I'm so
sorry.
No,
carry on.
I'm quite passionate about this because I feel very strongly about male role models. Because in my school, when I was a head teacher, the local authority had a policy of putting all the single mothers in the council estate, and there were no men there at all. So I do think that it is important that all these babies and all the mothers get this sort of the children have the male role models. So I didn't mean to imply that it couldn't be a brother or a grandfather. In fact, I do know a lot of grandfathers who've given a huge amount of support to, their daughters or daughters-in-law. But maybe that mandatory bit could be access to so many weeks.
Nikki, it's a great idea. I just want to get another caller in. Thank you very much for your call. Joyce from Norwich, you're up next. Paternity leave, good, bad, necessary? Should we mandate for it?
I'm absolutely fuming. What about all the forces wives? They can't have their husbands holding their hand. I was 17 and I had twins and my husband was posted abroad and I had to get on with it. I was away from my family. When I was 19, I went with my twins who were 14 months old to Singapore on my own. Took 5 days to get there. I had no support from family.
That sounds so hard, Joyce.
All these women are whinging and moaning about having their husbands holding their hands. What about the thousands of forces wives?
Yeah, but Joyce, just because, and it sounds like that was a real tough time for you, really, and still is for anybody whose husband is in the force or working overseas. I just think because you had a hard time, does that mean everybody should have a hard time?
No, but why don't these women stop whinging and moaning about having their husbands holding their hand when there's thousands of RAF wives and army wives who are left on their own virtually? They're away from their families.
Joyce. Okay, but Nick, should we stop whinging and moaning?
Well, I don't think I think there's a situation, if you force someone to do something, there's a natural resistance. And I think a lot of women, and you can probably answer this better than me, don't want their partner with them for the first 2 or 3 weeks. They want to sort it out themselves, maybe with their mum or another female, as opposed to having a guy there who might be all hands and thumbs and a bit clumsy. And
I think that's really doing men a disservice. Most men are more capable than that and more useful and more helpful as well.
But what I'm saying, just let me finish. What I'm saying is, surely it's the partners, the choice together. Do we want to be together during this time, rather than forcing a woman to have her other half with her when she might not want him? That's what I'm saying.
It's not about forcing,
because you can do it now.
Making a diktat. It's about facilitating choice.
It's there already.
But not long enough. And actually, Joyce, I mean, what you went through sounds like absolutely horrendous, and hats off to you. But I don't believe that women talking and having expression and being able to debate things is whinging or moaning.
Joyce, thanks for your call. Though Shirley from the West Midlands, paternity, it's not getting a great rep here, actually. Lots of people thinking that it's a bit useless, it would appear.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. I couldn't hear you too well then.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
That's all right. I hope you can hear me.
I can.
I've listened to everybody's point of view, and the lady in the blue, she's fabulous. She should have her own show.
Agreed.
She explains everything so well. The gentleman, he makes some good points where he says not everyone does want to have someone and doesn't want to have it forced on them. But in my case, and lots of other women's cases, I've got long-term chronic illness, and you definitely do need some help from somewhere. And I had an elderly mum that couldn't have helped me, no family that could have helped me, and you can't know what's going to happen or how you're going to feel when you come out of hospital. You may have lost a lot of blood. I couldn't walk properly for weeks. So, you can't just make that decision like that. And Joyce sounds like she had a terrible time, which nobody should go through. So, if we set some guidelines where we can all work together to enjoy that bonding experience, what's wrong with that?
It does sound lovely, I think. I certainly would have loved it. But thank you very much for your call. Thanks for all your calls on this. It's been really, really interesting to hear lots of different perspectives. We're going to move on now. Later, are single-sex schools old-fashioned? One of the UK's most elite private schools is finally allowing girls in after centuries. So we'll be getting your views on that. But after the break, as almost half of us fail to recognise a stroke as a medical emergency, Dr. Ellie Cannon will be here with some potentially life-saving advice on how to help a stroke victim. And also, if you have any questions that you want to ask Dr. Ellie about strokes, please do get in touch. Maybe you're worried you've had a mini stroke or a loved one has. 0207 862 2222 is the number for any questions you might have, and we'll see you right after this. Welcome back to Jeremy Vine Extra. Now later we're going to be discussing whether single-sex schools are old-fashioned, but now I am joined by Dr. Ellie Cannon for Talking Health. So this section of the show, as always, is devoted to answering your questions. Now, a new NHS survey found that almost 40% of Britons don't recognise a stroke as a medical emergency that requires urgent attention. And 1 in 5 of us admit that we wouldn't be confident that we could recognise the typical signs. So today we're going to clear up any confusion with some potentially life-saving advice on how to help a stroke victim. This is also your chance to ask anything about the condition. Most of us are sort of familiar with but perhaps don't know very much specifically about it. Maybe you're worried that you could be at greater risk of a stroke. Perhaps you're worried that someone that you care for, love, has had what they call a mini stroke. Whatever your concerns, get in touch and hopefully we can answer some of your questions. 0207 862 2222 is the number for that. So we always start with the most basic of questions. What is a stroke?
It's a great question.
Yes.
So a stroke is when the blood supply to your brain has been interrupted, either by a blood clot or because of a bleed on the brain. And what we would all recognise as a stroke is some sort of weakness resulting from that, whether that is a weakness in an arm or a leg or speech changing, something to do with vision. So effectively, it's a little bit of brain damage, actually.
And who do strokes affect?
So anybody can have a stroke, but it's absolutely something where your risk increases with age. So we would find it unusual to see somebody under the age of 50 with a stroke. And there are risk factors for strokes, quite similar to those for heart disease. So things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, we know it's associated with smoking and alcohol consumption, and also an abnormal heart rhythm that a lot of people have got called atrial fibrillation.
Now, there's different types of strokes. What kind of different types can you have?
Well, probably what people have heard of is mini strokes as opposed to a stroke. And a mini stroke, or a TIA, is actually when the problem that's occurred, whether it's a weakness or a loss of vision, only lasts for 24 hours and then it reverses. Because in an actual stroke, that doesn't happen, it doesn't reverse. So there are mini strokes and a normal stroke, if you like. And then there are different strokes to do with whether or not it's been caused by a blood clot or a bleed, which is important because that affects the treatment we would give you. And then there are different types of strokes depending on which area of the brain is affected. So if it's the area that controls your speech, of course it will be your speech that's affected. So there's it's a big spectrum really.
Now, most people will be aware of, in fact, I think there was a study to say 87% of Brits are aware of FAST.
Yeah.
With the letters spell out what you're supposed to do or how to spot the signs of a stroke. But very few people actually can tell you what those letters stand for. So I think we've got a little graphic that we can bring up, a little picture here.
Yeah.
So can you talk us through all the different parts of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So FAST. So we've got F is for face. Has their face fallen on one side? Can they smile? Just ask them if they can smile. A is for arms. Can you lift both arms up and keep them there? Because if you couldn't, that would imply that you had arm weakness. S is for speech. Does their speech sound slurred? Has it changed? Does it sound strange? And then the T is purely for time. It's time to call 999. Quick, act fast.
So face, arms, speech. Time to call 999. The NHS are also doing a huge campaign at the moment, aren't they, to raise awareness, I suppose, of strokes and how to help someone that's suffering from a stroke. And this is images that they're posting of people and the people that have saved their life.
Yes, it's really fantastic because the whole point is that it is this quick action that saves somebody's life. And they've had a couple of well-known faces who have been saved because of people they're working with. So I know the radio DJ Mark Goodyear was one of them, and I think it was his producer that called 999. And then also normal people who they've been saved by a partner or a child calling calling 999 for them.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to say that we're joined by one of the pairs featured in this campaign. This is husband and wife, Keith and Angela London. Thank you very much for joining us. Now, you had a stroke, Keith, in 2021, so not that long ago, actually. Can you take us back to June and what happened on that day?
Yes, good morning to everybody. I was taking my car in for a service and Angela and I had gone in. We came home. I had some papers I didn't need. I took these into a room. Then I felt my arm was doing things. It was going up and down. And my voice, I shouted out. I thought I called out to Angela. I managed to get upstairs. Angela didn't hear me. But when I got up into the bedroom where she was, she said, "Darling, I think you're having a stroke." She asked me to look at her and see if I could smile, which I could. I couldn't speak, I couldn't get my words out. And she said, right, just let me hold your arm, let me see if you can grip my hands. I'm left-handed and it was reasonably okay, but my right was weaker from what Angela told me. I don't remember a lot of this, but Angela recognised the fast areas of the stroke, and she obviously rang the ambulance. They were marvellous. They were here within 10 minutes.
Wow.
They were unsure whether I'd actually had a stroke, but after a few minutes, it was decided they would blue light me to the hospital, which they did, and they assured Angela because it was COVID, she couldn't come with me, I would be seen straight away, which I was. And I saw the doctors and the nurses, and I had obviously a blood clot, which I didn't know. My blood pressure was extremely high. I can remember them asking me lots of questions about my age, where I was, did I know this, and I couldn't get the words out.
Oh.
And it was quite. I wasn't scared. That was the weird thing. I knew I was in good hands. I knew that. So
that's so interesting. That's so
Yes.
interesting to hear that you weren't scared, Angela. You, on the other hand, that must have been. I mean, what was going through your mind? You acted fast.
To be honest, I didn't panic at all, which is strange. You just sort of go into a mode where you just want help. I recognised it straight away that wasn't Keith, and I just rang 999. And we were so lucky that the ambulance was near. The awful thing was not being able to go with him. That was the worst, because you're then at home wondering how bad is this and what is going to be the outcome.
So you guys seem to be a very cool, calm and collected couple by the sounds of things. But how did you know what to look for, Angela? You seem to be very quick on spotting the signs.
I'm a bit of a worrier and I read a lot, but both my parents had a heart attack and my mum in 97 actually had a stroke, which I actually diagnosed, strangely enough, over the phone because her speech was odd and we dashed there. So I've always been aware of strokes, purposely because Keith's parents lived to a good age with nothing wrong, but I knew that I was maybe at risk. So that was why I'd always talked about it, that if anything happens like that, Keith, just call 999. Don't say, do you want a cup of tea or something? So I've always been aware of it.
Well, do you know what? It just goes to show how important it is that you actually know these facts and you know fast and what it stands for and what you're looking for, because clearly in this case it's saved Keith's life. Do you have any advice for people out there whose loved ones might have suffered a stroke and how to care for them in those early days?
Well, we were quite lucky because Keith had got there very, very quick and his outcome was super. But one of the best things we could say for people that survive is to join the Stroke Association, because they have been so helpful. Although Keith physically was fine, it affected his mental health in a way. You're very worried, you're very apprehensive, it scared you. And that is something you can talk about with other people as well. And that helps you, your mental health really as well. So I would say to people,
definitely join or get in contact with the Stroke Association, and they'll be invaluable helping you.
Listen, thank you very much, Keith and Angela. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your story there. It's a real eye-opener to know your facts when it comes to strokes, because you could just save someone you love's life. Keith was able to recover quite quickly and walk his daughter down the aisle as well, which is lovely. Other people aren't so lucky though. So what are the potential effects of a stroke if you aren't as fortunate as Keith?
Yeah, so obviously it's a huge spectrum, and that really comes down to sort of which area of the brain is affected. So people will know loved ones affected by stroke where they're not able to walk anymore, or their walking is impaired, may not be able to look after themselves. But some people make a full recovery. It's a whole spectrum, and this goes back to how big the stroke was, where it was, how quickly people get treatment. But very much now, compared to sort of decades ago, we want to treat stroke very, very actively and very quickly, like we do with a heart attack. So it is a call 999 situation.
Even you just suspect it, get on the phone.
Yeah.
Susan from London, what's your question for Dr. Ellie?
Hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah. Apparently I had a mini stroke a couple of years ago, and since then my walking has been impaired because I've used a stick. But mainly it's my memory. It's really awful. Sometimes I don't know what day it is, and I've been told something, and then within a couple of minutes I've completely forgotten what they've said to me. I just wondered if you could tell me the signs. Apparently you've got more chance of having a major stroke. Sorry, you have to excuse my voice. I just wondered if there are any signs I should look at for.
Any signs on the potential for another stroke, Susan?
Yes.
Yeah, so what's really important, Susan, is that we, with your GP and maybe with what's called a TIA clinic, who look after people who've had a mini stroke. Now what's so important, as you've highlighted, is that we prevent you having any more. And we do that by sort of looking after all of the risks that you might have. So helping to keep your blood pressure low, making sure that you don't have an abnormal pulse, helping you with things like cholesterol management and statins. And that's really sort of the crucial thing when anybody's had an event like a mini stroke, maybe being on blood thinners, depending what your situation is. So that's sort of really what's important going forward, and the best we can do to help prevent you having another one. And absolutely, the memory may be from TIAs, from mini strokes, because obviously the memory is controlled by the brain, and that could be an area that's been affected.
Hey, Susan, I hope that helped. Michael from West Midlands, what's your question for the doctor?
Oh, hello, Sean. Doctor, I've had a stroke for about, I suppose, 18 months now, and it's left me with my left arm completely useless. And I just wondered whether there is a recovery time or none at all. In other words, have I got it for the rest of my life?
Can it get better?
Well, it really depends. It really depends on the sort of individual situation, but also what treatment you undergo sort of in that sort of first few moments when you have the stroke. So it's really important that you speak to or have a consultation with somebody who does stroke physiotherapy, and they can give you an assessment. And that's something you can have in the community. You can even have it at home if you're housebound, or you can have it in sort of a local community service.
That's something the NHS would provide?
Yeah, that's something from the NHS, so local services for post-stroke physiotherapy, and whether or not there is function that can come back with very specific rehabilitation physio.
So get back to your GP and start asking for that, Michael. Linda from Birmingham, what's your question for the doctor?
Hi everybody. It's about my daughter. She had a major stroke in 2010. She was 42, and I was just wondering why she never got the chance to have the drug busting thing. They didn't give it to her, and I know one hand it could have killed her, but it could have also brought back, because now she's in a care home in Birmingham, and to me, she tells me that she don't want to leave. If I wants me to sign a do not
resuscitating for her, because she said, if I had another stroke, Mum, you couldn't let me live like this again, could you? And I just wondered why she never got the chance to have that drug, because it affects the whole family around her, and it's been 13 years now, nearly May, and it's just like she's dumped in the care home, and nobody cares, nobody does anything, and I don't understand why.
That sounds so traumatic and so hideous. You're talking about oxygen when they have.
No, it's when somebody's had a stroke, we try and give them drugs really quickly to basically bust the clot. So I think that's what Linda was referring to, like clot busting drugs to like literally break the clot so we can get the blood supply back. And I'm really sorry to hear about that, Linda, and for your daughter. And the only thing I can think of is we don't know when somebody's had a stroke straight away whether or not it's been a clot or a bleed. And if we give somebody clot-busting drugs and it's actually a bleed, that can be incredibly dangerous. And I can only imagine that sort of came into play. Maybe they didn't know she'd had a stroke because at 42 they wouldn't have expected it. So I'm so sorry to hear about that.
Also, 13 years ago, would things have improved now?
Yeah, well, we were giving clot-busting drugs 13 years ago.
And are we better at deciphering?
Yes, we are. Stroke management has really, really just changed so much in the last few years for the better.
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Ellie, for answering all of those questions, and thank you for all of your calls as well. We're going to have to move on now. After the break, we'll be asking, are single-sex schools old-fashioned? Perhaps you went to one and you loved it, or maybe you went to one and you think it's terrible. 0207 862 2222, whatever you think. We'll speak to you right after this. Welcome back to Jeremy Vine Extra. Nick and Gemma still here with us, and now we're asking if single-sex schools are old-fashioned. What do you think? 0207 862 2222 is the number you need to give us a ring with your views. Now, the prestigious Westminster private school is preparing to admit girls to all year groups for the first time. The school, which has played host to six former British Prime Ministers, has been a boys' school for a century, with girls allowed to join in the sixth form for the past 50 years. But it's planning to become fully co-educational from the age of 7 upwards in order to fully reflect the diversity of the 21st century. So that's just one school, but this is something that's happened sort of across the country. Since the 70s, really, we've seen single-sex schools become more co-ed over the years. And actually, Nick, you've got an interesting story about your education and your children's education, because it's seen that sort of journey.
Yes, I went to a single-sex boarding school. I mean, all my schools were single-sex from the age of 7 to when I left at 17. And from 13 to 17, I was away at a boys' boarding school, which was good. It's a good, very good school, excellent school. I sent both my children to the same school, but I wouldn't have sent them had it been a single-sex school. So for me, there's a very different dynamic. The girls, when they went, were only there from the sixth form. So they went at the age of 6. Well, in fact, I'm not actually sure that's true. Certainly when my daughter went, she went into a sixth form girls' house. There's a very different dynamic. For me, a healthier dynamic. I think co-education all the way through works. I think when you introduce the opposite sex at a certain age, particularly at the age of maybe 13 or 16, it can cause problems. So I just think there's a very nice dynamic when it goes all the way through. And when you went back to school as a boys' school, so after the end of term, or at the beginning of term you go back, there was a sort of bit of an austerity, bit of strictness. I don't know, it was quite dark. When my daughter went there, the girls were hugging each other, and it was just a lovely place to be. And it was noticeably different. And I had this thought that it would be like this, and it was. And I decided there's no way I was going to send them if it remained single sex. So they went there and they had, by and large, a good experience. But it was a very different place.
I mean, you had the full experience of going to a single-sex school and feeling what that was like. But academically, particularly girls do incredibly well at single-sex schools. Jen.
So there have been lots of studies done on this, and it does seem to say, the evidence suggests that girls thrive in a single-sex school a little bit more academically. There's something about subconsciously not dumbing down, not fitting into those sort of gender
They're also more interested in sports, apparently.
Sport, etc. That said, my daughter, who went to a mixed primary school, has been in a single-sex school, and she was glad when the boys came in at sixth form. It didn't necessarily suit her, so every child is different. What they say about boys is it's actually very useful for them to have some girls in the mix. It slightly softens those sort of macho behaviours, the sort of alpha behaviours. Apparently, it's really quite healthy. So I think if you're talking overall, it probably is better to go co-ed. I went to a girls' school. I was boy mad when I left.
Was that the same?
Absolutely. I taught my A-levels early, and I had the option of staying on to do Oxbridge or just getting out into the world. I remember going home at the end of term and saying to my mum, sitting in the kitchen, saying to Mum, I don't even know what a girl looks like. I'm having a year off. It was, it's not natural, is it, at 17 to be like that?
That's correct. That's correct. It becomes sort of like this species, and it's all a bit like, oh, how do I act around them? And that's not.
You have parties where you're both at the opposite, because all my pals went to similar schools, and you go to a party and the girls were there and the boys were there, and who was going to be brave enough to go over
cross that line?
There's a lot of examples in government at the moment as well that aren't good adverts for these schools, these public boys' schools.
Well, I noticed you're not pointing out any individuals, but I'm sure we can all imagine who you're talking about there. I'm going to throw in another dynamic to this, and it's just the fact that if girls do better at single-sex schools academically and emotionally, and they're more free to get involved in sports and lots of different activities, boys do better academically, not so much emotionally. Are we actually just sacrificing girls' achievements in order to help boys cope a little bit better, Gemma?
But that perhaps you could look at it like that. I mean, I think like everything else in life, what is an ideal is to have choice across the board. So if you've got a great, like the school that my daughter goes to is a state school, it happens to be single sex. It's been really good for her academically, but like she did miss, perhaps she felt it was a bit cliquey. She felt that it was a bit missing a male company and, anyway. But every child is unique, and it's really, in an ideal world, parents would have choice. They don't really. You get what school you're given. You get what school.
You're lucky if you get down in a school.
When we applied for Freddie, our choice was nothing, because they were all oversubscribed. It was so stressful.
And then what happened?
Well, yeah, we sent him to a different school.
Oh.
But then in the end, you got a choice. But the first thing we got said, nothing available.
Oh, we're going to go to calls now. That's terrible. Liz from London, it is a thing that all parents seem to struggle with at the moment, is trying to get their kids down for the school they want, or just any school in general. Liz, what's your thoughts on single-sex schools? Are they a bit old-fashioned?
Great for girls, bad for boys. I have absolute experience of it. Okay, I think I've got a daughter wedged between two boys, which I think is the same as you, Nick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, my daughter got into one of the top schools, state schools, girls' schools in the country. It's like the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, They are taught everything, intellect, politics, everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's practically perfect in every way. It's a comprehensive school. She's independent, fearsome and strong.
Great.
My sons, my brother went to, I'm a twin, my twin brother went to Cardinal Vaughan, one of the top male state schools in the country. He hated it. He felt repressed and held back and so on and so on.
So Liz, what do we do? Do we hold girls back just a little bit to make things better for boys, or do we just say, well, that's just the way it is, and continue with single-sex schools?
Well, the way I look at it is that my daughter had that period of time to develop as a girl, right? And women need that, because then they have to face the workforce and an unequal world with men, and I love men, I don't hate men in any way, but it just gives them that time to develop their character and their personality, whereas it's different for boys. So I do absolutely hold by that. It's been very good for her, just like it's been very good for Gemma's daughter. And it's been proven to work. Not so good on the other side.
Yeah, it's not so good for boys, Nick, and that's the problem. What do you do in that scenario? Because boys and girls are both equally important, so how do you handle that?
I think the emotional development, the shortfall you're talking about, would actually develop if it was all the way through the system. I think it's very ad hoc at the moment, isn't it? And I think if you just say we're going to have co-education, education all the way through, and that is the norm, I think boys will pick up on that emotional immaturity that's existing. And if not, then we can deal with it and concentrate on it and make it better.
Well, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid, today. A huge thank you to Nick and Gemma for being a wonderful panel. We'll be back at 9:15 tomorrow morning. Until then, have a lovely afternoon.